So in our last session, we discussed about what is private IP, what is public IP, what is subnet, what is address space, and how can we connect a private IP machine with the public IP, or how can we connect with the private to public. Got it? So right now we are going to see how to static a private or public IP. Okay, so whenever you make a machine or whenever you make a virtual machine in the cloud, the IP that you have assigned, it is the dynamic IP. So whenever you restart your server, your IP maybe change. Public IP 100% change, but the public IP maybe change. It have the lease time. Okay, suppose I have created a virtual machine over here, and I by default the machine IP is in the dynamic state. Okay, so when I restart my machine IP will get changed. So suppose if I have a domain, so what is the drawback of the IP change? Okay, suppose I have a domain like abcd.com, and I have mounted this domain to machine IP. Suppose my machine IP is 53.23.45.64. So suppose when I launch my machine IP is this. Okay, and when I hit on the browser abcd.com, it goes my domain goes to this IP, and it will replicate my website on the web browser. So suppose when I restart my machine, okay, so this IP will get changed if this is not in the static state. Okay, so by default this IP in the dynamic state. Let's see in the Azure panel. So I'm going to create a resource here, Windows machine, and I will show you the IP will change here, and select any resource group here, like my new company, and Azure user. So I can select any size here, and machine 1 and Azure user, select the and everything set as default. Now select create. Okay, so let's see when our machine is launched and when we restart this and the IP is changed. So we have two conditions. First, let it create it. So machine is going to be deployed. We have two conditions. One is when we restart from the Azure panel. Okay, and the another one is when we stop and start the machine. When we restart from Azure panel, and when we stop and start from Azure panel. So we have two conditions. Let's see. Once the deployment is completed, we will connect it through the RDP and see what. So basically in this session, we will see how to assign a static IP on the machine. Means you can assign the static public IP, or you can assign the static private IP on that machine. So first let it deployed. Uh, Deployment is completed. Let's go to the resources and see the things. So right now we have a IP here. I'm going to paste this IP into the paint so we can understand better. So suppose when I launch my machine IP is this, and I successfully mount the abcd.com to this IP. So when I hit the domain address into the Google Chrome browser, it will redirect me to this IP. So we have two conditions: when we restart our machine from the Azure panel and when we stop and start from the Azure panel. So first try the restart, what the things IP is changed or not. Okay, so go to the Azure panel and let's connect with the RDP once. Copy this machine and paste it here. Now try to connect. So as you can see, I am able to connect with my machine. Okay, so now minimize that machine and uh, first let it start it completed. So machine is successfully started and our desktop is showing. And minimize this machine and now click on the restart button here in the panel, Azure panel. Click on the restart. So let's see, do you want to restart the machine one? Yes, and you can see the effect into the machine directly. So machine VM is successfully restarted, and here you can see the notification is successfully restart the machine, and once refresh the panel, and also the RDP is connection is not going. Okay, so the thing is that when we click on the restart, it will not affect our machine. Okay, and IP is not changed. You can see IP is not changed here, and also the private IP is not changed. Okay, now click on the stop button. So when we click on the stop button, it will deallocate my all resources from that machine. Only the disk is available. It will deallocate my all compute resources. Okay, so let's click on the start button. Sorry, stop button. Yes. So public IP will be lost if the VM is stopped. Okay, so you can see the error. Your public IP will be lost if you restart your machine or if you stop your machine. Okay, so if you want to reserve this IP, you can tick this. Other option is you have to set uh, this IP as a static IP. Okay, so if you want to reserve it, you can tick it, but this is not the good practice. So first see what happen when we stop a machine. So click on the stop. Our RDP session is already going. Our RDP session is already stopped, so you are not able to connect with that machine. So it get failed. Okay, so once the machine is successfully stopped, you will get notification over here, and let's wait for the stopping the virtual machine. You can see remote desktop cannot connect to the remote computer for one reason: the server is not available or not accessible or not available on the network. So let's close this. So machine is successfully stopped, and let's cross this. You can see the public IP is not available here, only the public interface available here. Okay, so public IP, when you refresh this page, your public IP is not there. So you can see public IP is not there. So we write here, when we restart our Azure machine on the Azure panel, no change. And here we write public IP will be lost or changed. Okay, so let's start this machine once. So we will get a new IP. Let's start this machine and refresh this page once when we get notification. So machine is successfully started, and now click on the reload button and see the public IP of that machine. So machine IP is changed maybe, and you can see the new IP of that machine is this. Okay, so you can see the machine IP is changed from, so this server is this compute power is completely deleted, and the public IP or the compute resources or the disk is assigned to this IP. So now if we are try to connect with if we are trying to open this domain, so it will not find our this IP. It will not found this IP on the host machine. So that's why it denied our website. It shows the site can't be reached, or maybe some internal error. So that's to avoid this problem, we need to assign a static IP on that machine. That's why we require a static IP on that machine. So whenever we restart our machines, or stop or start from anywhere, so the IP will be reserved for that particular machine. So let's see how can we assign a static IP on that machine. So first go to the Azure panel, and here you can see, let's refresh. So as you can see, deployment is succeed, and now click on that machine. So you can see we will get two types of IP here. One is public IP and second is private IP. So how can we by default it is in the dynamic state. So when we stop or start our machine, so our IP will get changed. So to avoid this situation, to avoid this problem, so we need to make it static. Okay, so first, if you want to make a static private IP here, so you can go through the networking of section. In the networking section, you have to select your network interface card. So here is the network interface card. Click on that and click on the IP configuration. In the IP configuration, you can see your private IP is in the dynamic state. So if you want to make it static, click on that and save as static. Click on static, and now you can also change your IP address of your machine in the same network. Okay, so okay,
Okay,
so
if we give our desired IP here, then
yes,
that IP will be assigned to that VM permanently.
yes,
So
VM to the
post restart, it will not change.
permanently, but it will be in your same subnet. Okay, so this IP will be in the same range that you are only able to change. Okay, so to make it this IP as static, click on the static button and click on the save. Okay, also you can change your public IP over here. Okay, so we cannot make the public IP static here. We have to choose another option. But for the private IP, if you want to make your private IP as a static IP, static private IP, you have to select the static and click on the save button. Once you click on the save button, so your machine may be rebooted for the private IP. But if you make changes on the public IP, whenever you make changes on the public IP, your machine will be 100% rebooted if your machine is a Windows machine. Okay, if the Linux machine is there, so no need to make any reboot on the machine.
Okay, changes to private IP will not ask for reboot to your Windows VM.
Yes, it is not asked for the Windows VM.
Okay, so only changes for public IP will ask for reboot of Windows VM.
Windows machine, yes. If you have the Linux machine, so no need to take any worry of that machine. You can simply change anything on that machine.
Okay, fine.
Okay. So IP is successfully static. Now go to the Windows Azure, and in Windows Azure, go to your Windows machine. Select your machine, Windows Azure. This is my machine, and you can see if I go to the networking section, in the networking section, you can see select the network interface card. In the network interface card, you can see select on the IP configuration. In IP configuration, you can see this private IP is in the static state. Okay, so now go back to the machine and click on the overview. So to make your public IP as a static IP, okay, so whenever you reboot this machine, your IP will be changed. Suppose if I click on the stop button, so there is a message, public IP will be lost if this VM is stopped. If you want to reserve it, you can take this option. We are not going to this option. We are going to follow a standard option here. So first make it public. First make a static IP on that machine. Click on that IP address. In the IP addresses, change the state of the IP address. Click on the static. If you click on the static, your machine may be rebooted. If there is a Windows machine, it is 100% chance to be rebooted. And if this is a Linux machine, so no need to take worry of anything. Okay. Click on the save button. So as you can see, we got an message, but no need to take worry about this message. Simply click on that machine and refresh this panel once again. And once you click on the stop button, so you don't have any message right now. Okay, so in previously when we click on the stop button, you will get a message that you want to reserve your public IP or not. Okay, so now try to reboot this machine and see the effect, if our public IP is changed or not. Click on the stop button and yes, let's copy this IP once again and save it to the RDP session. So click on the RDP and paste this IP. So please wait for the machine stopped successfully. And so machine is successfully stopped and deallocated. You can see public IP is reserved here. Okay, so our compute power is stopped and deallocated, but our public IP is reserved for that machine. So whenever we start this machine, it will start with our public IP. Okay, so let's start this machine and connect with that machine. So let's wait for the notification. Once the machine is started, we can easily connect with that machine. So machine is successfully start. Let's click on the remote desktop connection and paste the IP here, and you can see you are good to go. So is it clear, Sandeep and Ghosh?
Yeah, what
Yes,
my
sir.
understanding is, we for a VM we will be having two types of VMs. Sorry,
Yeah,
two types of IPs. One
yeah.
is public and private.
Okay,
So if we change by default, both the IPs are dynamic. So
okay.
for public IP, if we change from dynamic to static, then if it is a Windows VM, it will get reboot. If it is a Linux, it will not reboot.
Yes.
For private, it is also by default to dynamic IP. So if we change that from dynamic to static, it will not ask for reboot for both Windows and Linux VMs.
Yes,
Okay, got it.
got it. So okay, so we have you can see in the home section. In the home section, you can see we have two machines right now. Okay, so one machine is that 10.0 dot something. Okay, and the another machine is, let's duplicate this tab and click on that duplicate. And click on the home. In the home section, we have one more machine is here, machine 1. Okay, so both are in the same region. Okay, both are in the same region, and our next topic is that how can we make a peering, virtual network peering. Okay, so let's understand the scenario first.